A billionaire fought for a black woman accused of murder, even when the world had already decided who she was. He believed her, stood by her. But there was one thing she never told him. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just break the case. It broke him. Everyone was holding their breath in the courtroom as Nadia Cole sat at the defense table. She had learned over the years how to be present in a room with half-truth, and she had gotten very good at it. Miss Cole. The prosecutor said her name like he suspected it was a lie. The medical examination conducted at the time of the incident found no evidence consistent with assault on your person. No bruising. No trauma. Nothing. He tilted his head. You were never abused, were you? The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Nadia did not move. The only thing she did, the one thing she could not stop herself from doing, was let her eyes drift to the row of seats behind the defense table. To Beckett Wren. He was sitting very still. This was the stillness of a man whose entire understanding of something had just shifted, and who had not yet decided what to do with the betrayal. He had fought with everything, every asset he had, just to give her justice and freedom, so they could be together without her running every time. But he had not expected her betrayal when the truth mattered the most. She looked away first. She did not answer the question. But wait. We are getting well ahead of ourselves. To understand what brought Nadia Cole to that courtroom, and the silence that swallowed that room whole, we have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the trial. The beginning of her. Her name was not Nadia, but that was how it appeared on her social security card, her fabricated employment history, and the lease of her apartment in Midtown Atlanta. Nadia Cole had a credit score and a gym membership. She was 31 years old, and she had been running for 6 years. She had a go bag under her bed and had memorized 3 different routes out of Atlanta. She had a phone number that would reach a man who made new documents, in case she ever needed to become someone else again. She works at Wren Capital, a private equity company which occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower on Peachtree Street. It managed close to $8 billion and answered to only one person. Its founder and CEO, Beckett Wren. He was widely regarded by almost everyone who had ever worked with him as exactly the kind of man you did not want to disappoint. Beckett Wren did not suffer mediocrity. He noticed Nadia's work before he noticed Nadia. He had pulled the analysis on a mid-sized logistics acquisition, a file that had passed through 3 senior analysts before landing on his desk, and there was a single annotation in the margin of page 11, written in a hand he didn't recognize, that identified a liability his team had missed. It would have cost him much, but whoever had written that note had caught it when no one else had. He asked his assistant, who had touched the file last. Nadia Cole, his assistant said. She joined the firm 8 months ago. Mid-level analyst. She's actually quite good. Beckett looked at the annotation again. Then he closed the file. Send her the Merit Capital brief, he said. I want her read on it by Thursday. The Hargrove deal changed things. It was a $43 million acquisition of a struggling infrastructure company. Beckett pulled a small team together for it, and Nadia was on it. For 6 weeks, they worked. Late nights. Weekend calls. A 4-day stretch in Charlotte where the seller's legal team tried to renegotiate terms at the 11th hour, and everyone in the room had to hold their nerve. Nadia held hers. She was the kind of person, Beckett observed, and got impressed. He was not yet naming what he was noticing. He was simply noticing. There was a night in the Charlotte hotel. 11:30, the rest of the team gone to bed. When the 2 of them were still at the conference table with takeout containers and open laptops, and Beckett made a comment about the seller's CFO that was, by his standards, almost funny. Nadia looked up from her screen and laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, and then seemed to catch herself. He watched her pull the composure back into place. He found out he was more interested in the 2 seconds before that, when it had slipped. "You do that," he said. She looked at him. "Do what?" The silence that followed was long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Old habit," she said finally. "Some of us weren't built for boardrooms. We just learned to function in them." He didn't push, but he remembered it. The deal closed on a Friday. The team went to dinner. Beckett came, which surprised everyone because he rarely did. He sat across from Nadia for 2 hours, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with work. He asked questions he didn't usually ask. She answered more than she usually answered. She walked to her car alone afterward, and sat in it for 5 minutes without starting the engine. She was doing the thing she had promised herself she would never do. She was letting someone matter. He kissed her for the first time on a Tuesday evening in his office, after everyone had gone home, when she came to drop off a corrected model and stayed, without either of them deciding she would, for another hour. It wasn't planned. It wasn't smooth. It was the kind of thing that happens when two people who have been holding something back for too long are finally in the same room at the right hour. He pulled back first, looked at her. He was not a man who was uncertain about many things, but he was uncertain about this. Not about wanting it, but about what it meant to want it. What it asked of him. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Yes," she agreed. Neither of them moved. "I don't do this," he said. I don't let things get complicated." "I know." She knew. She had watched him for months. She understood, without him having to explain it, that this man had looked at love from a distance for most of his adult life, and decided the math didn't work. That his parents' marriage had been a long, beautiful disaster of betrayal that had ended when he was 17 and never quite finished ending. That he had concluded somewhere along the way that the safest thing a person could do was want nothing they couldn't control. She understood it because she had reached the same conclusion herself, by a different road. "Then we don't have to," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't say I wanted to stop," he said. What grew between them over the weeks that followed was quiet and deliberate, and more honest than either of them had planned for. They were not loud about it, but they did not pretend. It was the most real thing Nadia had felt in 6 years, which was precisely why she should have been more afraid. She saw the woman on a Thursday. She was coming out of a restaurant near the office when she caught movement across the street. A woman in her 50s, gray locks, a yellow coat she would have recognized in any light, at any distance, in any life. Mrs. Denton, who had lived 3 houses down on Calder Street, who had waved at Zora every morning for 11 years, who had brought food to the house after her mother remarried, and never once said what she must have suspected about what happened inside it. Their eyes met. Mrs. Denton's face did something complicated. Recognition moving through it like weather, slow and then all at once. Her mouth opened slightly. Nadia smiled. A steady, polite, stranger's smile. And then she turned and walked in the opposite direction without rushing, because rushing was the thing that gave you away. She walked 2 blocks, turned a corner, and stood in a doorway for 30 seconds with her eyes closed. That night, she moved her go-bag from her closet to under her bed. She told herself it was precautionary. She told herself a lot of things. 3 weeks later, a podcast episode dropped. It was called The Ones Who Ran, a true crime series revisiting unsolved cases and fugitive files. Episode 14 was about a woman named Zora Medina, 25 years old, charged with second-degree murder in the death of her stepfather, Raymond Medina, in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta. The case had gone to trial. The defendant had fled before sentencing. She had not been found. The episode art used a photograph. It was 6 years old. Her hair was different. Her face was younger, but it was her face. The episode circulated modestly. A few thousand listens in the first week, some social sharing. A thread on a true crime forum. Not viral. Not catastrophic. But enough. It was the kind of slow, lateral spread that was almost more dangerous than a direct hit. Seeping into the edges of things, reaching people who weren't looking for it. It reached Beckett on a Wednesday. He had not been looking for it either. A former college friend had texted him the link with a message that said only, "Doesn't this woman look like someone from your firm?" The idle curiosity of someone with nothing more urgent on their mind. Beckett listened to the episode alone in his car. Then he sat in the parking garage for a long time. He did not go to Nadia. He did not call anyone. He went to his office and pulled every resource he had, quietly, without explanation, and spent the next 72 hours reading everything that existed about Zora Medina and the death of Raymond Medina and the trial that had almost concluded before she disappeared. What he read did not make him afraid of her. It made him furious. Raymond Medina had been a respected man in his community, a churchgoer, a man with connections and a family that had money and a defense fund assembled before the ink on the arrest warrant was dry. The case against Zora had been built to look like a story about a volatile young woman who had attacked a man in his own home. The abuse she had described, years of it, documented in nothing but her own testimony, because the system that should have caught it had not been dismantled by a defense that questioned her credibility, her history, her character. She had been 25 years old, sitting in a courtroom being unmade, one question at a time. Beckett closed the file on the 4th night and sat in his office with no lights on. He understood now, so many things about her. The vigilance she wore like a second skin, the way she never fully arrived in a room, the go-bag she thought he didn't know was under her bed, the name she'd given him that felt, sometimes, like clothes that didn't quite fit the person wearing them. He also understood, and this was the thing that stayed with him, quiet and complicated, that she had not told him. She had let him choose her, let him lean into her, let this thing between them become real and solid. And she had not trusted him with the truth of who she was. He did not know how to hold both things, the understanding and the hurt, the fury on her behalf and the knowledge that she had still, somehow, kept him outside of it. For 4 days he said nothing. He answered her texts. He was normal, or as close to it as he could manage. But something in him had gone still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, and she felt it. Then she came to him. She knocked on his office door at 7:30 on a Thursday evening after the floor had cleared. "I need to tell you something," she said. He put down his pen. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he thought she might change her mind. And then she said, "My name is not Nadia." And she told him. She told him about Zora, about Vine City, about the house on Calder Street, about a stepfather who had moved into their lives when she was 14 and changed the nature of everything that came after. About years of it. About the night she had fought back. About a courtroom that had listened to her and chosen not to believe her. About running. She told him almost everything. What she did not tell him, what she had never told anyone, what lived in a sealed place inside her that she had built 6 years ago and had not opened since, was that the story she told was only half true. That the night she described, she had not been the only one in that room when Raymond Medina died. When she finished, the office was very quiet. Beckett was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. She had prepared herself for many possible responses. Anger, distance, the careful withdrawal of someone recalculating the terms of what they'd agreed to. She had not prepared for him to stand up, come around the desk, and sit in the chair beside her. I already knew, he said. His voice was even, quiet. Not from you. From the podcast. I've had 3 days with it. She stared at him. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that it doesn't change what I think of you, he said. That I was angry. Not at you. At everything that put you in that courtroom in the first place. At a system that looked at what you described and decided it wasn't enough. She didn't speak. She wasn't sure she could. I'm not letting you face this alone, he said. I want to be clear about that. She cried then. Not loudly. She was not a loud person, had not been for a very long time. But it was the kind of crying that happens when a body has been braced for a long time, and someone finally tells it that it's allowed to rest. Tears that came from somewhere old. He didn't move to stop it. He didn't say anything. He simply sat beside her, steady and present, while it moved through her. When it passed, he said, "Tell me what you need." She thought about it for a long time. I don't know, she said. I've been out running this for so long, I don't know what staying still looks like. Then we figure it out, he said. Together. It was the simplest thing he had ever said to her. It was also the most radical, coming from a man who had spent the better part of his adult life deciding that together was a word that cost more than it returned. Beckett Wren, when he decided to do something, did it completely? Within 48 hours of their conversation, he had engaged 3 attorneys, a criminal defense specialist, a civil rights litigator, and an investigative firm that specialized in wrongful conviction cases. He did not ask Nadia's permission. He informed her of what he had done and told her that if she wanted him to stop, she could tell him so, and he would stop. She did not tell him to stop. The legal team went to work. They pulled the original case files. They commissioned a review of the prosecution's evidence. They tracked down witnesses, people from the neighborhood, people who had known Raymond Medina, a social worker who had briefly been involved with the family when Zora was 17 and had written a report that had never made it into the trial record. The DA's office notified that Zora Medina had been located and was cooperating with a legal review of her case, moved to formalize the warrant. There would be a hearing, then a trial. Nadia, Zora, understood, in the weeks of preparation that followed, what it meant to have Beckett in her corner. Not because of the money, because of the way he worked, methodical, unflinching, treating every detail of her case with the same total attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. She watched him sit across from her attorneys for hours and push on every weakness in their strategy until they found the answers. She watched a man who had built his world around self-containment open that world and pull her inside it. She had never been anybody's first priority before. She didn't quite know what to do with it. You don't have to do this, she told him. Late one night, when the attorneys had gone and they were alone in his living room with the case files spread across the coffee table between them, he looked up from the document he was reading. I know, he said simply. Beckett, Nadia, he said it evenly. I'm here because I want to be. Stop trying to give me a door to leave through. She closed her mouth. She looked at him for a long moment. Old habit, she said. He almost smiled. I know. The trial began on a Monday in October. Beckett's legal team had built a careful, thorough defense. The suppressed social worker's report, testimony from a neighbor who had witnessed Raymond Medina's behavior on multiple occasions, a forensic review that challenged the prosecution's reconstruction of the night in question. It was a strong case, not airtight. There was no such thing in a courtroom when the story you were defending was this old and this contested, but strong. Nadia sat at the defense table each day with her hands folded and her face still and answered every question her attorneys had prepared her for. He had pressed on inconsistencies in the original police report. He had asked, quietly but persistently, about things that didn't quite add up. And then he produced the medical examination report. It was thorough, conducted in the hours after Nadia, after Zora, had presented herself to police. Miss Cole, the medical examination conducted at the time of the incident found no evidence consistent with assault on your person. No bruising, no trauma, nothing. The prosecutor tilted his head. You were never abused, were you? The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Already in the ears of every person sitting in those rows, already working its way into the space between reasonable and doubt. Nadia looked at her attorney. She looked at Calloway. She looked at the jury. And then, because she could not stop herself, she looked at Beckett. He was sitting very still. The way he sat when something had broken his understanding of a thing, and he was doing the work of reorganizing around the new shape of it. His jaw was set. His eyes were on her. And in them she could see the precise, terrible moment. A man who had gone to war for someone begins to wonder what he was actually fighting for. She looked away. She did not answer the question. The recess that followed was short and excruciating. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Beckett's lead attorney, Marcus Webb, a careful man who did not use words carelessly, pulled Beckett aside and said, with the measured delivery of someone delivering information they would rather not be delivering, "There's something she hasn't told us." Beckett said nothing. "The medical report is a problem we can fight," Marcus said, "but only if we understand what it's actually documenting. Right now, we're in the dark, and I cannot build a strategy around things I don't know." "I'll talk to her," Beckett said. He found her in the small room off the main corridor where they'd been meeting during breaks. She was sitting at the table, hands flat on the surface, looking at nothing. She did not look up when he came in. He sat across from her. He waited until she met his eyes. "What else are you hiding from me?" he had almost asked. But he looked at her face, the exhaustion in it, the grief that sat just under the surface of her composure like water under ice. And what came out instead was quieter. "You're still not trusting me with the whole truth," he said. She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed on his. And that was answer enough. He stood up. He went to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "I'm not walking away," he said without turning around. "But I need you to understand that I cannot fight for you if you won't let me know what I'm fighting." He left. She stayed in that room for a long time. The days that followed were the worst of the trial. Not because the case collapsed. Marcus Webb was skilled enough to slow the damage, to redirect, to buy time. But because of the distance. Beckett still showed up. Every day. He sat in the same row, same seat. He spoke with the attorneys. He reviewed documents in the evenings. He did not retreat from the work of protecting her. But the warmth between them had gone quiet. The thing that had built over months, careful and real and hard-won on both sides, was now sitting under a pressure it hadn't been designed for. He was still there. He was just no longer all the way there. Nadia felt every inch of the distance. She understood it. She did not blame him. She had given him half a truth and watched him build a fortress around it, and now the fortress had a crack in it, and she couldn't tell him how to repair it without dismantling the one thing she had promised herself she would protect. She thought about Josephine every night. Joe, who was 23 now, who had grown up in the years since that night carrying something no 23-year-old should carry. Joe, who was somewhere in another city, living a careful, quiet life that Zora had made possible by absorbing everything so Joe would not have to. Joe, who did not know where her sister was, who did not know that her sister was currently sitting in a trial that was going wrong and could not say the one thing that would fix it. She would not call her. She had promised herself that too. She kept both promises for as long as she could. Josephine had sat with the information for a week. She had made arguments to herself, careful and thorough. Zora had made her promise never to come forward, had made her understand that the whole point of the arrangement was that Joe stayed invisible, stayed safe, stayed free with no stigma. That was the agreement. That was what Zora had asked for in exchange for everything she'd given. But Zora had made that agreement 6 years ago, when she thought she could outrun this, when neither of them knew it would end in a courtroom. Joe read the news coverage of the trial on a Monday evening. She read about the medical examination. She read about the question that had been asked. She sat at her kitchen table for a very long time. Then she looked up Beckett Wren. It wasn't hard to find him. He was exactly the kind of man the internet documented thoroughly. She found his firm, his office address, his professional history. Then she booked a flight. She appeared at the offices of Wren Capital on a Wednesday morning. She told the receptionist she needed to see Beckett Wren, and that it was about the Nadia Cole case, and that she would wait as long as necessary. She waited 40 minutes. Then she was shown into a conference room, and Beckett came in alone, without attorneys, and sat across from her. He looked at her for a moment. She had Zora's eyes, her physical quality, and the wariness that had learned to wear the clothes of stillness. "You're her sister," he said. It wasn't a question. Joe looked at him. "She didn't send me," she said. "She doesn't know I'm here." "I know," he said. Joe put her hands flat on the table. She looked at them. Then she looked up at him. "I was 17 years old," she said. "And he came into my room. He had always been coming to my room." The room went completely still. My sister walked in. Joe's voice was even. She had rehearsed this, Beckett could tell. Had practiced the delivery of it enough times that she could get through it without stopping. She saw. And she stopped it. And then it was over and he was on the floor and she looked at me and she said, "You were asleep." "You heard nothing. Say it back to me." And I said it back. She pressed her lips together. She told the police she'd been the one. That everything that had been done to me had been done to her. She stood in that courtroom and she said it like it was the truth. Joe's voice broke. Just slightly, on the last word. She gave up her name for me. Her whole life. 6 years of running. 6 years of being nobody. Because she looked at me when I was 17 years old and decided she'd rather disappear than let me sit in a courtroom and say what happened to me out loud. Beckett was very still. Joe looked at him directly. "I'm ready to testify," she said. "I've been ready for 6 years. She just made me promise never to do this." The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of the weight of what she'd just laid on the table between them. The real story, whole and complete, offered without negotiation. Beckett looked at her for a long time. Then he reached for his phone and called Marcus Webb. He came to her that evening. She was in the apartment, sitting on her bed when she heard the knock. She already knew. She let him in. He looked at her. At the box of photographs she was holding, at her face, at the particular quality of exhaustion she was wearing. And he sat down beside her on the bed without asking permission. "She came to me," he said. Nadia closed her eyes. "She's in Atlanta. She's safe. She wants to testify. You can't let her. She's 23 years old," he said quietly. "She's been carrying this for 6 years. And you do not get to make that decision for her anymore." She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with something she did not have a name for. Something that contained understanding and grief, and something fiercer than both. "You took everything," he said. "Her trauma. Her crime. Her right to speak. You carried all of it so she wouldn't have to. And you called it protecting her. It was protecting her." "Yes," he said. "It was also the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard of a person doing." She looked away. He waited. When she came in, he said, she didn't look like someone who wanted to be saved. She looked like someone who had been waiting a very long time for permission to be brave. Nadia was quiet for a long time. The box sat between them on the bed. "She's okay?" she said finally. "She's okay." Another silence. Longer. "I should have told you," she said. "All of it. From the beginning." "Yes," he said. Simply. Without anger. "I didn't think—" She stopped. "Try it again." "I've been alone with it for so long that I stopped knowing how to put it down. I didn't know how to trust someone else to hold it without breaking it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to break it," he said. She nodded. She believed him. He reached over and took the box off the bed and set it on the floor. Then he sat back beside her. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we finish this." Josephine testified on a Friday. She walked into that courtroom and she sat in the witness stand and she told the truth. All of it, from the beginning without stopping. She was 23 years old and she had the voice of someone who had been rehearsing a thing in private for a very long time and was finally saying it in the room where it needed to be said. She described what Raymond Medina had been, what he had done to her. The night Zora had walked in, the 20 minutes of whispered rehearsal, the choice her older sister had made before the police arrived. She looked at Zora twice during her testimony. The second time, Zora was looking back. The medical examination report, re-examined in light of Joe's testimony, now told a different story. It documented the absence of trauma on Zora's body, which was, of course, exactly what you would expect to find, because Zora had not been the victim. It documented nothing inconsistent with the truth. Prosecutor Calloway spent 2 days trying to find the seam in Joe's testimony. There wasn't one. She was not a rehearsed witness performing a role. She was a young woman who had been waiting 6 years to stop performing the role she'd been given and simply tell the truth. On a Tuesday afternoon, the DEA's office filed a motion to dismiss. It cited newly presented evidence, material testimony unavailable at the time of the original trial. The self-defense statute applied clearly to the facts as now established. There was no prosecutable case. The judge granted it without ceremony. He did not make a speech. He signed a document, said the words, and closed the file. That was it. 6 years of running. Over. The courthouse steps were white stone, wide and worn, catching the October light in a way that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. Or perhaps, Zora thought, exactly as significant. Her name was Zora. She said it to herself, standing at the top of those steps, the way you say a word you have been afraid of for a long time and realize, suddenly, that it no longer has the power to undo you. Joe was beside her. They had not spoken much since the testimony. There was too much between them for easy conversation, too many years of silence to cross in a single afternoon. But Joe had found her hand in the courtroom when the motion was granted and had held it, and Zora had let her. She let go now so Zora could go down the steps. Beckett was at the bottom. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking up at her, and he had the expression of a man who has been braced for a long time and is only now, slowly, allowing himself to unbrace. He did not say anything when she reached him. He didn't ask if she was all right, didn't reach for words to fill the space. He simply stood there. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she stepped into him. His arms came around her, not careful, not measured. The way he held everything, but fully. The way a person holds something they almost lost and have decided they are never going to be measured about again. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt the solidity of him and thought about 6 years of running, 6 years of becoming someone else, 6 years of standing in rooms she was pretending to belong to. She was so tired. She was so tired of running. He held her on those courthouse steps in the October light, and she let him. And behind them, Joe stood at the top of the stairs and watched, and the world was indifferent to the magnitude of small moments, unaware that what was happening on these steps was 6 years in the making, and had cost more than any of them would ever fully say out loud. After a long time, she lifted her head. "Beckett." He looked down at her. "My name is Zora," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Something unlocking, something arriving. And he said it back to her, quietly, like he was learning the shape of it. "Zora." She nodded. She stepped back, but she kept hold of his hand. "What happens now?" she said. He looked at her. Then he looked up at Joe, still standing at the top of the steps. Then he looked back at her. "Now you stay," he said. "For me." She tightened her hand in his. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't need to think about it.